Welcome to ACP. I'm your host, Alex Bollfrass, the head of strategy, technology, and arms control at the International Institute for Strategic Studies in Berlin. On each episode, we welcome the world's leading experts in arms control to share their knowledge and assessments of the most critical issues. Whether you're new to the topic or need a refresher, I hope you will join us in our exploration of everything related to arms control. In this season, we offer primers on all the nuclear weapons arsenals currently existing in the world and their relationship to arms control. I hope it helps you better know a nuke.
India and Pakistan are next door neighbors with flight times of less than 3 minutes. The risks of inadvertent escalation in a crisis are very high, not only in terms of existing capabilities, but also emerging technologies coming into the mix, such as AI and offensive cyber capabilities that can be exploited by third parties, which might not be attributable.
Despite these challenges, India and Pakistan make up for a great example for the rest of the world, where both countries, over a period of decades, have negotiated a set of confidence-building measures, particularly in the nuclear domain.
We stay in South Asia for today's episode in the company of two leading scholars of the Pakistani nuclear arsenal. We will be guided through its development and maturation, its effect during several crises in South Asia, its current trajectory, and opportunities for regional risk reduction efforts.
I'm Rabia Akhtar. I'm currently a research fellow at Managing the Atom Project at the Belfer Center, Howard Kennedy School. I'm also Dean Social Sciences at University of Lahore and Director of the think tank, which is based at University of Lahore Center for Security, Strategy and Policy Research. The early foundations of Pakistan's nuclear journey began with the civilian nuclear program. In the 1950s and 60s. Pakistan Atomic Energy Commission was established in 1956, and by 1965, Pakistan had signed the agreement with Canada to construct its first nuclear power plant in Karachi. By 1968, Pakistan had decided that it would not join the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty because it had cited security concerns, particularly India's nuclear ambitions. The strategic shift towards nuclear weapons development came in the 70s after the dismemberment of Pakistan and establishment of a new country called Bangladesh in 1971. It was Prime Minister Zulfikar Ali Bhutto who convened a meeting of scientists in January of 1972, asking them to develop a nuclear bomb and give Pakistan the nuclear weapons capability. And he's famously cited in literature as saying that we will eat grass or go hungry, but we will develop a weapons capability of our own. During the 70s, Pakistan developed its uranium enrichment technology at the Kahuta research laboratories. By 1979, the US had actually discovered the uranium enrichment facility and imposed the Samington Amendment on Pakistan, cutting off aid to Pakistan that it was receiving as a penalty for developing uranium enrichment technology. By 1983, Pakistan had tested through a cold test a nuclear device under Pakistan Atomic Energy Commission under the direction of Munir Ahmed Khan to set Pakistan on the path of killer weapons development. The Pressler Amendment was passed in 1985, which tied the US aid Pakistan was receiving to fight the Soviets with Pakistan's non-nuclear development. However, during the period of 1980s of President Reagan, Pakistan continued to support the US and Soviet Afghan war, but simultaneously continued to develop its nuclear weapons program. By late 1987, A.Q. Khan was on record by giving an interview to an Indian journalist confirming that Pakistan had nuclear weapons capability. The Pressler Amendment that was passed in 1985, it was actually enforced under George H.W. Bush in October of 1990, cutting off military aid to Pakistan due to its nuclear weapons development.
I'm Mansoor Ahmed. I'm an honorary lecturer at the Strategic and Defense Studies Center in the Australian National University. I hold a PhD in international relations from Quaid-e-Azam University, Islamabad. I've held fellowships at Sandia National Laboratories and the Belfer Center at the Harvard Kennedy School. By 1990, Pakistan was able to build an air deliverable design The Atomic Energy Commission continued to refine and miniaturize and improve their designs that would be suitable for delivery by missiles. In terms of the overall breakdown of responsibilities of the program, there were two teams that were responsible for the Pakistani weapons program. There was the Khan Research Labs, but its mandate was the centrifuge project for uranium enrichment. There was Pakistan Atomic Energy Commission that was responsible for all other nuclear fuel cycle projects, including uranium exploration, processing, and production of uranium gas, which was the feedstock for the centrifuge project, fabrication of nuclear fuel for the Karachi nuclear power plant, and later for the Khushab reactors, the building of the civilian nuclear power plants under IAEA safeguards, the plutonium production program outside safeguards at Khushab, and the reprocessing program. The high mark in South Asia's nuclear landscape was when India chose to carry out its nuclear tests in 1998. Pakistan was forced to respond. The decision was made by the Defense Committee of the Cabinet, and the Atomic Energy Commission that had been working on various weapon designs and core testing was able to respond within a few weeks. It carried out 5 nuclear tests on May of 28, followed by a 6th test on 30th of May, 1998. In the wake of these tests and this overt nuclearization, the Pakistani Prime Minister in the UN General Assembly proposed the idea of a nuclear restraint regime, which called for nuclear risk reduction, conventional force reductions, and peaceful resolution of disputes, especially conflict resolution of the core issue of Jammu and Kashmir. Pakistan doesn't really have an officially declared doctrine, but it has a first use official policy. And both countries are at least officially following the policy of credible minimum deterrence. In 1998, their policy was one of minimum credible deterrence, but as they moved towards optimizing their nuclear forces, they moved towards credible minimum deterrence. And full spectrum deterrence is essentially designed to plug the gaps in the deterrent posture at the tactical level, which the Indian side was perceiving to be a vulnerability which they could exploit in terms of limited war. And that was plugged at the nuclear level through full spectrum deterrence and at the conventional level through the Pakistani comprehensive response doctrine. And in pursuit of fully operationalizing their nuclear forces, both countries are in the process of completing their strategic nuclear diets.
India and Pakistan became overt nuclear powers after testing their nuclear weapons in 1998. Their first Cuban Missile Crisis was the Kargil conflict, which happened just a year after overt nuclearization. Pakistan backed forces occupied the strategic peaks in the Kargil sector, attempting to cut off Indian supply routes. India launched a full scale military operation to retake and reclaim their territory. And under intense international pressure, particularly from the US, Pakistan withdrew its forces. And this was the first major conflict post 1998, a nuclear test showing that nuclear deterrence, even though the jury is still out whether it can qualify as a nuclear crisis because the nuclear forces were not operationalized on both sides, but yet presence of nuclear weapons in the sense that both countries possess nuclear capability did not prevent them from engaging in a limited conflict. And so that set the path towards both countries exploring whether they could test each other's nuclear thresholds under the nuclear umbrella. The post nuclear era conflict and crisis, the first major one was Twin Peaks crisis in 2001 and 2002. It was a 10-month long military standoff followed by the 2001 Indian Parliament attack, which was blamed on Pakistan based militant groups. India mobilized its forces alongside the border, and so did Pakistan. Over 1 million troops were deployed by both sides, leading to the fears of war. Had there been no diplomatic interventions or pressures from third parties to de escalate, both countries could have seen a conflict as two nuclear countries. That was the conflict that sort of raised the concerns about crisis stability in South Asia. That also led India to develop the military strategy aimed at enabling swift, limited conventional strikes against Pakistan without crossing nuclear red lines. The Mumbai attacks happened in 2008. So between 2001, 2002 until 2008, Pakistan and India realizing that there is no space for limited conflict that can easily spiral to high levels of escalation. This thought process brought them to the negotiating table to negotiate some of the nuclear ceasefires, setting up hotlines and keeping skirmishes at the line of control to a very minimal level. But then comes 2008 with Mumbai attacks, and the Lashkar carried out coordinated attacks in Mumbai, killing over 170 people. And India accused Pakistan of state involvement, which led to threats of military strikes. But again, diplomatic efforts and back channel battling prevented escalation into a war. The latest and the last attack between India and Pakistan came in the Pulwama Balakot sector in 2019, which was the first aerial combat between these two nuclear powers. A suicide bombing led to the killing of 40 Indian soldiers, and it was blamed on Jaish-e-Mohammed, again, a group that was based in Pakistan. So India launched airstrikes on Balakot, which is Pakistan mainland. Pakistan responded with airstrikes, downing an Indian MiG-21 and capturing an Indian pilot. And third-party mediation helped diffuse this crisis. This was the first aerial conflict, like I said, between two nuclear-armed countries, and it raised considerable concerns about escalation control. So India and Pakistan have had pre-nuclear era conflicts, have fought 3 wars. But the post-nuclear era conflicts saw a shift towards the propensity of fighting limited wars and proxy conflicts. And when the world had thought that nuclear deterrence had it figured out, making total war less likely. Nuclear deterrence has not prevented military crisis, but has influenced its resolution, pushing both parties to accept third party mediation and not escalating their conflicts to more devastating grounds in their conflicts and wars. In the past 5-10 years, Pakistan has made considerable efforts towards modernization and is continuing in its strides to achieve land based missiles, air based deterrence, and sea based deterrence vis a vis India. The estimates that the world has about Pakistan is somewhere around 160 nuclear warheads. Although 2024 was the year in which the estimates that came out through FAI pushed India ahead of Pakistan. And this was really celebrated in Pakistan that finally the world has gotten its numbers right, that India is ahead because it had a head start anyway over Pakistan. Pakistan has multiple missiles in its inventory, starting from short range tactical nuclear weapons, 60 kilometers range, to highest Shaheen 3 that it has of 2,700 kilometers range. Pakistan has also tested a missile, which is a MIRV, multiple independently targeted re-entry vehicle called Ababil, signaling its modernization. Pakistan currently is advancing towards its nuclear triad, but is not quite there yet. It has land based missiles, but it has a Babur 3, which is a submarine launched cruise missile, and has air based deterrence. But it's still quite far away from developing a full fledged nuclear triad. Pakistan's nuclear doctrine is not a written doctrine, unlike that of India or many other nuclear weapon states in this world. Pakistan's nuclear doctrine rests on mutually assured destruction, has established strategic priority vis-a-vis India, where there is established nuclear deterrence at the strategic level. The nuclear doctrine is ambiguous in stating whether it has a clear-cut no first use. What it rests on is a no first use as a condition, whereby it says that it will not be the first one to use nuclear weapons. But nuclear weapons will only be used if its existence is threatened. And there are various interviews that have been given, policy official statements that have come out over the period of years, stating what Pakistan's nuclear thresholds are. And if crossed, Pakistan could consider nuclear use. But those thresholds are also ambiguous enough for letting your adversary make whatever they want to make of it. This is the Schellinges approach of leaving something to chance that Pakistan works with. and hopes that it does not have to use nuclear weapons in any conflict with India, since Pakistan is the only country with a nuclear weapons program very clearly directed towards one country, which is its adversary.
India and Pakistan are next door neighbors with flight times of less than 3 minutes. The risks of inadvertent escalation in a crisis are very high, not only in terms of existing capabilities, but also emerging technologies coming into the mix, such as AI and offensive cyber capabilities that can be exploited by third parties, which might not be attributable. And in both countries having nuclear arsenals in a canisterized form, some of the forces in both India and Pakistan are now being moved towards canisterized systems, and especially in the naval leg, where the SLBMs will be available for instant retaliation. The risks are enormous for inadvertent and accidental retaliation, especially if you add emerging technologies and conventional counterforce into the picture. So, arms race stability on the conventional level might be improving to a certain point, at least in land and air forces between India and Pakistan. But the strategic stability in the nuclear realm between India and Pakistan is deteriorating because of the exponential asymmetry that exists and is likely to grow between the nuclear capabilities of both India and Pakistan, which will continue to keep India and Pakistan into an arms race competition. In the absence of a strategic restraint regime or move towards conflict resolution. Now, the situation has changed in the sense that historically, India enjoyed a clear conventional edge over Pakistan. But the India China crisis, particularly the Ladakh crisis of 2020, has forced India to move at least two of the four strike corps from the Pakistan front to the China front. They have been repositioned. Almost all the high tech equipment that India is procuring is now being divided between the Pakistan front and the China front. But nevertheless, anything that India is acquiring to meet the Chinese threat can potentially be used against Pakistan. This two front threat has helped reduce the conventional asymmetry between India and Pakistan, at least in land forces and in the air forces. Coupled with Pakistan's own conventional force modernization, has not alleviated Pakistani strategic anxieties because almost 80% of Indian offensive capabilities are still deployed against Pakistan. So the atmosphere is not becoming conducive towards arms control. And India's decision to abrogate the special status that it had accorded to Jammu and Kashmir, Article 370 in 2019, led to a downturn in relations. This is a major driver of mistrust and hostility. It's an arms race that is an action reaction cycle that seems to have taken over both India and Pakistan. From a more contemporary perspective, the important thing to understand is that there have been several proposals, especially the strategic restraint regime that was first proposed by Pakistan in October 1998. It has been again put on the table. But the Indian perspective is that given the Chinese threat, it is not possible for them to move towards a strategic restraint regime with Pakistan. Now, there are two different dyads. There is the India-Pakistan dyad, and then there's the India-China dyad. But there are examples of the conventional forces in Europe treaty and other Cold War examples that in terms of arms control, they can be amended, they can be studied, they can be applied to the South Asian context, provided there is a will to move in that direction. My sense is that both India and Pakistan will continue to invest in second strike capabilities in their completion of their triads. But at some point, their nuclear development will plateau. It's still maybe a decade away. Until that time, both countries will have to work towards ameliorating and reducing the mistrust and creating the conducive conditions. In terms of the doctrinal shifts, it is interesting to note that all these nuclear armed states, India, Pakistan, and China, started investing in conventional counterforce capabilities, particularly conventional counterforce through dual use delivery systems and canisterized systems. For example, India has built a triad of the BrahMos cruise missile, which was built with Russian assistance. And they're building a hypersonic version of the BrahMos also there. And they have integrated some of them under the Strategic Forces Command with some of the air launched versions with the SFC. Even a conventional counterforce, now Pakistan believes that these are dual use. An incoming missile, whether it has a conventional or a nuclear warhead, will not be able to be differentiated by the country that is being attacked. And even if a conventional counterforce strike is launched during a crisis, it will have escalatory potential. And these strategic anxieties have been exacerbated by the fact that several Indian scholars and policymakers and even former heads of India's Strategic Forces Command, they've said that India needs to have another look at snow first use policy. It is already working to put in place capacities and capabilities that will allow it to carry out a first and a second comprehensive strike through conventional and nuclear forces combined. A decapitating strike through conventional forces is very much possible because of the sheer number of offensive systems that are being developed and deployed on the Indian side. This has also led to the genesis of a strategic rocket force, which is being planned and built and raised on the pattern of the Chinese PLA rocket source. But this will be a conventional strategic rocket force to be deployed against both China and Pakistan, but it will be extremely destabilizing. So it appears that India is pursuing a damage limitation strategy because it is also working on a ballistic missile defense shield. It has tested various ABM technologies coupled with ASAT capabilities and S-400 type systems, long range systems, and India's own indigenous BMD systems. Coupled with that and a robust leg of the naval nuclear triad and the conventional offensive counterforce options clearly points to the fact that India is moving towards a counterforce strategy that will have a combination of conventional and nuclear counterforce options. So Pakistan is also responding with its own conventional counterforce options, long range, precision, and standoff conventional capabilities. But its missile program is still India centric. The longest range missile system that it has been capped at 2,750 kilometers. Pakistan conducted the first test of an MIRV system, the Ababil missile, with a range of 2,200 kilometers as far back as 2017, when the test of the first submarine launched cruise missile was also carried out. Now, Pakistan's naval nuclear triad will be based on its conventional attack submarines. Pakistan is acquiring 8 Chinese conventional attack submarines, which will be able to carry nuclear tipped submarine launched cruise missiles. But these capabilities are India centric, and Pakistan has not inducted or developed or deployed or even tested any system that can strike targets beyond 2,750 kilometers. While Pakistan does not have a nuclear submarine program as yet, it might move in that direction in the future in order to complete its triad and have a secure and an assured second strike capability, even though it has a very robust land and air based deterrent and is building the naval leg of the triad as well. The non attack agreement on the nuclear facilities is still in force, and it has been very successful despite numerous crises in the India Pakistan dyad. But there is a dire need for a nuclear restraint mechanism between both countries. There is a hotline between the directors general of military operations, but that is not a dedicated nuclear hotline. There have been proposals for ABM treaty to include China as well, but I think the developments have overtaken this idea because both India, Pakistan, and China are moving ahead with their own MIRP programs. And India and China are both working on their own missile defense shields. There might be appetite for an incidents at sea agreement. There could be greater clarity for respecting the ceasefire on the line of actual control between India and Pakistan. And most importantly, which I think can go a long way to reduce the vertical proliferation in South Asia, is stop in the dual use exploitation of nuclear energy programs for weapons purposes, or rather to address South Asia's fissile material conundrum. Now, Pakistan has no unsafeguarded civilian nuclear facilities, and its nuclear fuel cycle is completely separate from its civilian program. Civilian program is completely under IAEA safeguards. In India's case, most of its program is outside the scope of the IAEA, including its uranium enrichment, plutonium production, and fast breeder reactor program. And that, in addition to the large amounts of stockpiles of civilian plutonium that is very much weapon usable because India's power reactors are all Candu type power reactors, which produce a higher percentage of plutonium 239 isotope compared to light water reactors. The evolving nature of the international system, especially in terms of the shifting geostrategic alliances and the great power competition, which is now moved from the Euro Atlantic to the Asia Pacific and has led to the enactment of the US Indo Pacific strategy, has landed India as a net security provider for the United States. But Pakistan is unlikely to accept India as a net security provider, both in terms of conventional capabilities and nuclear capabilities. There could always be conventional arms reductions between India and Pakistan. There could be agreements on no force zones in which offensive systems of certain classes could be either removed or they could not be deployed based on some kind of a framework, but that has to be part of an overarching strategic restraint regime. It cannot be done in isolation. And that is invariably linked to conflict resolution between India and Pakistan, which is something that is being held hostage by the Jammu and Kashmir dispute, which is the core issue of conflict between India and Pakistan. And all the more reason for India to agree to a strategic restraint regime with Pakistan because of evolving nature of the Chinese threat all along the line of actual control. China claims all of Arunachal Pradesh, which the Chinese call the Little Tibet. They have also claimed territory in Ladakh and in other parts all along the 4,000-kilometer line of actual control. Both India and China have been investing heavily over the past few years in infrastructure, logistics, air bases, supply facilities, and deployments of artillery, aircraft, tanks, and also offensive systems of a strategic nature, such as cruise missiles and air defenses. So it is only in India's interest to proceed with conflict resolution and risk reduction with Pakistan so that there is a reduction in tension and Pakistan and India should be able to allocate more of their scarce resources to social economic development. While the conventional force balances might be moving in favor of Pakistan, the nuclear asymmetry is likely to grow because of the enormous latent capacity and the investments that are being made in India's program, especially their fast breeder program, their reprocessing program, and their highly enriched uranium program, all outside IAE safeguards. There needs to be imaginative and creative leadership in the region. If the superpowers could talk at the height of the Cold War, if Kissinger and Anatoly Dobrinin could sit across the table and do all the spade work for arms control, and the Politburo members would host US delegations in the Soviet Union and then come to a negotiated arms control agreement.
So South Asia remains a volatile nuclear environment, and the need for arms control mechanisms is absolutely more urgent than ever. Historically, Pakistan has actively advocated for arms control measures, often leading efforts to bring India to the negotiating table. Despite India's reluctance to engage in bilateral nuclear risk reduction mechanisms and frameworks with Pakistan, over a period of years, Islamabad has consistently proposed strategic restraint measures, including its offer of a bilateral strategic restraint regime with India, which aims at limiting nuclear and missile competition while promoting stability. However, India's preference for a unilateral force modernization and its growing alignment with external nuclear players such as the US have hindered bilateral, meaningful arms control progress. Despite these challenges, India and Pakistan make up for a great example for the rest of the world, where both countries, over a period of decades, have negotiated a set of confidence building measures, particularly in the nuclear domain, and have demonstrated that even limited engagement is possible in the absence of formal arms control agreements. The 1988 Agreement on Non-Attack on Nuclear Facilities is an extraordinary agreement which requires both sides to exchange lists and coordinates of nuclear installations annually. And it remains one of the most enduring CBMs. It was signed in 1988, it was ratified in 1991, and without fail, even despite every crisis that both countries have gone through, Even under nuclear umbrella, the lists continue to be exchanged on 1st of January. Similarly, the 1999 Lahore Declaration, it also established a framework for nuclear risk reduction, though subsequent crises eroded that implementation. There is a 2004 hotline agreement between the Director Generals of Military Operations on both sides, which has served as a crisis management. The strategic stability of South Asia is often analyzed through the lens of China, India, Pakistan, nuclear triangle, a framework which is promoted by Indian scholars as a trilemma. However, Pakistan does not view itself as part of such a triad because its strategic relationship with China is distinct from its adversarial equation with India. And unlike the India-Pakistan dynamic, which is rooted in deterrence and direct military competition, Pakistan and China share a strategic partnership based on defense, cooperation, economic collaboration, and regional stability efforts. Therefore, Pakistan's security calculus is primarily shaped by India, while China's strategic concerns are centered on the US and India rather than Pakistan. So, that said, the interactions among these three states still generate strategic instabilities, particularly as India's security dilemmas link both its northern and western borders. I have tried to look at this evolving security landscape of South Asia through a lens which is different from this trilemma that is projected. And I call it nuclear tetraplex, which offers a more nuanced perspective by encompassing interconnected strategic relationships among US, China, India, and Pakistan. And this framework highlights how US-China strategic complex and competition influences India's military modernization, which in turn affects Pakistan's security calculus. Pakistan finds itself navigating a multifaceted web of interdependencies, compelling it to allocate substantial resources to counterbalance capabilities of its more formidable. And recognizing and understanding this intricate interplay is essential for developing effective policies aimed at fostering lasting stability in the region. So moving away from the trilemma towards a nuclear tetraplex perhaps is a better prism to understand the complex challenges of strategic stability in South Asia. Pakistan's continued commitment to strategic stability, coupled with its historical advocacy of arms control, positions it as a key player in shaping the future of nuclear risk reduction. But the best bet on it is that India needs to recognize that there are mutual benefits of arms control by engaging in structured dialogues rather than relying on unilateral post-modernization. Right now, the space for any arms control bilateral dialogue is almost non-existent because countries are not on speaking terms with each other since 2019. They have minimal diplomatic presence in each other's countries. It's going to get more complicated as time passes by. Looking ahead, the future of arms control in South Asia needs to move beyond traditional CBNs to address new age threats, particularly those that are posed by emerging technologies, including cyber warfare, AI driven military applications, or even hypersonic weapons and other such technologies with disruptive potential. Both India and Pakistan, have developed offensive cyber capabilities, raising concerns over the potential for cyber attacks on nuclear command and control systems or even their critical infrastructure. A cyber no first use agreement between India and Pakistan would serve as a foundational arms control measure, which would ensure that cyber tools are not used to disable critical state functions or trigger unintended escalation. Regulating the military use of AI and drone warfare through arms control dialogues, which are bilateral, would help prevent destabilizing actions in future crises.
Thank you for listening, and to our guests and the European Union's Non-Proliferation and Disarmament Consortium for funding the series. Until next time, stay optimistic.